Good morning. Today is the seventh Elevate review panel for nonprofits. This is the first one specifically for just Elevate nonprofits on September 7th, 2024. My name is Anne Marie McCaskill Davis. I'm the Cultural Funding Specialist Senior with the City of Austin's Cultural Arts Division. Welcome to all of our panelists. Peggy Ellithorpe is a cultural funding specialist with the Cultural Arts Division as well, and she's serving as our tech pilot today. And then we also have Andre Solomon, who is going to be our equity facilitator. Thanks for being here. I'm going to talk a little bit about today's process. All the panelists have reviewed these signed applications we're discussing today. Prior to today's panel, they provided preliminary scores and preliminary comments. During this discussion, they have the opportunity to make adjustments to their scores and comments. We will provide a 10-minute maximum per application to review and discuss each application. We will stop the recording and the timer if we run into any technical difficulties. We've asked the panelists not to repeat themselves if they are in agreement with comments that have already been provided by other panelists. This is also a note that the panelists are not scoring on consensus, so they are allowed to have divergent opinions. They will not be announcing numeric score. And they're going to provide overall application comments and comments that align with the review criteria outlined in the scoring rubric, which was provided and on our website for the public since these programs launched. They should not be basing their scores on anything that is not within the rubric scope. So things like financial need or geographic service area should not be considerations in the scoring. We've also instructed the panelists to look beyond grantsmanship. They are also allowed to include firsthand experience with an application as part of their review. And they've also been allowed to review the applicant's website to find additional information, but it was not a requirement of the panelists. If a panelist has a conflict of interest, they will recuse themselves by turning off their mics and their cameras while that application is being reviewed. They will not return to the dais until that application, the other panelists have finalized their scores. Part of this process is we've assigned primary and secondary reviewers to each application. This does not mean that those are the only two panelists who have reviewed those applications. It's just a mechanism for us to facilitate a conversation. So the primary introduces the application, provides some information about it, and then provides their own personal comments about their review. And then the secondary will come in as just an opportunity to ensure that there is a secondary opinion through this panel process. Additionally, once the secondary is spoken, our equity facilitator, Andre, will open it up to the rest of the panelists to provide any additional comments. And again, remember, the panelists do not have to repeat comments that have already been said. And then we will finalize scores before the 10-minute mark. One thing to note, panelists, that I didn't mention in our executive session is that we'll have a brief debrief session after we've concluded at the end of the day, where we'll close out our Zoom windows and then just log back in using the exact same link. We'll go through and take some suggestions for improvement, and you'll have an opportunity to provide a survey, or we will provide you with a survey about your experience serving as panelists. That should be no more than 15 minutes at the very end of the day. All right, with all of that being said, let's get started with our first application up for review. It is Austin Symphonic Band. Stephanie is our primary, Neil is our secondary. Let me pull up the timer. Okay, we're all set with the timer. So Stephanie, whenever you're ready to begin, I'll start the timer when you begin speaking.
Hi, good morning. So we are going to first take a look at the Austin Symphonic Band whose key constituents are middle and high school students that are participating in band programs that gives priority to Title I school band programs, volunteer musicians, band directors, composers of band music, and local and visiting arts supporters. So something that I enjoyed about this application, I appreciated the intergenerational aspect that this organization has about bringing together students and more seasoned musicians and having them come together and learn from one another. Um, just taking a look at my notes. Overall, I think this was a good application. They listed some of their challenges, like they were very forthcoming with that. Like one of the biggest challenges that they had was finding venues in Austin because the prices for venue rentals have just skyrocketed, so they haven't been able to keep up. And that they are trying to reach a broader and more diverse community, which I appreciated, and that they had a challenge finding band music that is composed by underrepresented groups in the symphonic realm. So I appreciated that they listed their challenges, but they took steps in their application saying, okay, well, we're going to change venues and we're taking steps to broaden our musical scope. So yeah, so I guess I'll turn it over to Neil for secondary comments.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, I thought this was a well-written application, and I agree with a lot of the points you made. I would love to see more research on the cultural demographics of the band itself, the members inside of it. I did feel, or I did see that there was great leadership, especially from a technical standpoint, on in developing musicians, but could see some room, or maybe I didn't see where the cultural capital was coming from from a leadership standpoint. And would like to see more information on the specific middle schools and high schools that were being targeted, kind of resounding on the point you made earlier, Stephanie, about it does target Title I schools, but the information is there in regards to what middle schools and high schools in the city of Austin are most underserved, and just didn't see that really reflected as much in the application. So yeah, would love to open the floor to the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Neil. Anyone else would like to open the floor to everyone? Awesome. I would just say before handing it back to Anne, just again, the conversation on Title I schooling, I think it's just, which again is supposed to support low-income students, but just making sure to be mindful of the assumptions that come with that. Again, thinking of low income, there are unfortunately associations for people who are marginalized, people who are oppressed, but just remembering in the United States in particular, I can't speak to Austin, but in the United States, welfare and other services are mostly used up by our white counterparts. So just being mindful of the fact of assumptions, even though there are ingrained associations to a particular demographic. So just wanted to point that out there in my own looking at the grant.
I want to add a comment based off of lived experience to that, Andre. There was a time I used to mentor at I'm sure it was a Title I middle school in East Austin. And the group that I worked with was mainly Black and brown students. And one day I went to the second floor and saw that it was all white students. And that's where a lot of the resources were going from. So just wanted to kind of piggyback on what you said, Andre, about a lot of times there's assumptions about the resources is going to this school, but amongst that group, where is the resources going? So yeah, just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Anyone else just from what I said?
I'll jump in on that. I just wanted to review some of the remarks that I made. And I do think accountability to the community was one of the reasons I scored the way I did on that regarding that particular issue. So just making sure like there's performance measures that tie back to, you know, who you're servicing, and that the intersectionality portion, I didn't see that as clearly defined and discussed in the application as well. So just a focus on equity and making sure you're, you know, clear about who you're serving, as the others have said, and then a way to demonstrate that, I think, would be important.
Thank you. Anne Marie?
Okay, if there are no additional comments, you may finalize your scores. And as you're finalizing your scores and you want to pull up the next application in preparation, the next application we'll be reviewing is Inside Out Steel Band. And then just give me a thumbs up or a head nod if you are ready to go to the next application. And then Candace, Meredith, Stephanie, Natasha, are you all set? Or are you still working on finalizing scores? Okay, great. All right, so next we will be reviewing Inside Out Steel Band. Bianca is the primary, and Stephanie is the secondary. Bianca, I have the timer ready. So when you begin speaking, I'll start the timer. You're muted.
Okay, I am introducing Inside Out Steel Band, and the goal of this nonprofit organization is to improve access to steel pan opportunities for key constituencies, and they do this by presenting steel pan workshops. The nonprofit organization is run by a person who has been nationally recognized as a steel pan educator and composer. And although he's not a native Trinidadian, he understands that the Inside Out programming must include expert guidance from recognized direct culture barriers. The most contracted artists are Trinidadian people of color, which deeply impacts students of color from other key constituencies. I enjoyed that they were very forthcoming with that aspect of this nonprofit. I did want to see more specifics on the leadership of the program and the board members and regarding their lived experiences and communities that they associate with. I enjoyed that they had adaptations for the blind. I think that was really awesome that they incorporate that into their program. As far as even going as far as providing a printed program in Braille. They also provide a Spanish language interpreter, English and Spanish program. So I feel like they went above and beyond in reaching people who don't speak English and have some disabilities. I'd like to hand it off to secondary.
Hello. Okay, so some of the things that I noted in this application, in their history of service, it states that that began back in 1997, which is like a long history of service. However, I would have liked to see more information about audience numbers, participants, musical workshops in recent years. I was seeing a lack of information about like recent activities, and I would have liked to see more of that. And I appreciated that in their budget, they had a good list of details about the artist that they are going to hire, their fees, and just like the breakdown was good. And I liked that their 2024-2025 season already has scheduled. So it shows that the organization is well organized in their upcoming like musical season and their goals and what they want to accomplish. So I'll
Thank
turn
you,
it over to
Stephanie.
the group.
Thank you both, Bianca and Stephanie. Anyone else like to provide their comments? Neil?
Yeah, I wanted to also add, I would have loved to have seen a more specific breakdown throughout the application. It keeps mentioning people of color, which can be a very broad term. And so I would just like to see a greater breakdown, especially considering that this program is centered around mainly Black and Latino, Trinidadian artistry. So would love to see a greater breakdown of what people of color means and how those communities are being served and represented.
Thank you, Neil. Anyone else?
I really enjoyed this application. I think they did a good job of presenting a project that's unique to Austin. And I think, something, I mean, if we're talking about focusing on cultural diversity and like maintaining cultural diversity and supporting it, I think that was what I really got out of this, the effort to bring in talent from out of the country to like infuse, where it's draining out of Austin in some cases and being watered down a little bit. So, as long as they're including local talent and supporting, local artists, et cetera, and serving our communities, I always think it's a good thing. But I think it was overall a well-written application.
Thank you, Natasha. Anyone else? I would just like to add a little bit on what Neil was saying and Stephanie, just the desire of data on audience and participants. Two things, just the whole the focus that we're in cultural erasure, thinking about the accessibility community in general. There are supports, continue to be needed more supports, but often unheard is the marginalized communities, especially Black and Brown individuals. So just being mindful too when you're writing about the accessibility community to go in that depth, because there are unheard voices in that community. And then just thinking too about data, hopefully just for everyone, because I think this might be a overall comment within our time together, but just reminding organizations out there who will be listening to this how to integrate evaluation and feedback metrics into your programming, which is really hard when capacity, and also trying not to be overly patronizing to the people you're working with. So just noting that it takes a lot to create those frameworks and dimensions. So just for anyone thinking about how to do it in a way that's both human and also getting the information that you need. Anne-Marie?
Thank you, Andre. If there are no additional comments, you may finalize your scores. And while you're doing that and if you're ready to go on to the next one, Lulu Fest will be the next application for review. I'll give you some time to finalize your scores first. And just give me a nod or a thumbs up if you're ready to go. Okay. And Candace and Natasha, just want to make sure y'all are set. All right. Up next is Lulu Fest. Candace is the primary and Bianca is the secondary. Let me see. The timer is set. So Candace, when you begin speaking, I will start the timer.
So Lulu Fest is a organization that targets historically marginalized female band leaders. Pardon me. And their mission statement is where the traditions meet the progressives and all the leaders are women. Some of the things that I thought were particularly thoughtful about this application was the accessibility that they provided for their audience, as well as their language accessibility. Other areas where there needed to be more information or did not meet the Elevate grant criteria were the key constituencies, as well as their cultural leadership. There would needed to be, particularly in cultural leadership, needed to be more information available. And that's all I have.
So just bouncing off of that as secondary, they had a section in there for Lulu Fest. It was well written. It was a well written proposal. The section stated that the festival highlights female, BIPOC, and LGBTQ artists contributions to jazz music and has featured women leaders, composers, band leaders, and instrumentalists from Ecuador, Brazil, Cuba, Austria, New York, and beyond. They also mentioned that LGBTQ and BIPOC female artists have made up significant percentages of the festival artist roster since its founding. I would have liked to see the breakdown of those percentages if possible. But overall, I really liked that they mentioned focusing on utilizing local artists and not bringing in traveling artists. I think that I want to see more of that in proposals.
Comments from the rest of the group?
Yeah, I kind of would like to piggyback off of some of the comments Bianca made. I would have loved to, I want to start off by saying I think the program itself was very well written and thought out. But I would love to see and know more about which communities of self-identifying women are most marginalized in the acoustic music improvisation space. I saw that in between the website and the application. I saw that as a part of the mission, and would just like to see more accountability in what that looks like in regards to serving those communities.
Thank you, Neil. Anyone else?
I think I have a little bit of a divergent opinion. In the key constituents, it says like the NEA Awards, Masters of Jazz, and so far only 20% have been women. Realizing this, there were no women-led ensembles and new female musicians in jazz festivals, so on and so forth. So I think that I'm seeing this kind of as like one that live music is so essential to the cultural relevance of Austin. It's the, live music capital of the world. So important for the identity of Austin and the arts community. And I see this kind of as like a microcosm within that, there are not that many opportunities for women to take leadership roles in that live music, and especially, you know, like they, you know, stated like jazz for like a specific example. So I kind of saw that as the key constituents is like giving that, allowing that platform for these artists where historically they have not been given that space in this like very kind of particular or like specific musical opportunity. So.
Thank you, Stephanie. Anyone else?
I can add some lived experience into this. Because I did work with that community for a long time, and that is definitely an issue. There's a lot of organizations in New York, not a lot, but several around supporting women, you know, band leaders and side persons, side people. But there's definitely a shortfall in that area. There's you know, just like with every other, you know, industry, women like face unique challenges being represented and like taking a leadership role, as everyone else has said. And I've seen that firsthand. And I do know that not only are they underrepresented, but underpaid as well. And then just don't generally get the same respect as men leaders because there's a better community among men and a larger community among men jazz musicians. So that's just my personal knowledge.
Thank you, Natasha. Anyone else? I would just like to echo a lot that's been said about the dialogue about women in music. The first thing that comes to mind is the Berklee Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice. And then just thinking about everything that's already been said about the representation that's lacking. I am a classical musician, and I know it's not jazz, but even thinking about women compositions played by major orchestras around the world have actually declined, even though we've been talking more about how to include people, even BIPOC representation as well. So just being mindful that I do think we're also seeing a pushback and backpedal on people who are marginalized or people who face oppression. So just putting that out there that there is still work to be done. Anne Marie.
Oh, sorry. I had one more comment. In the budget, the largest line item that I saw was payments to artists, which I appreciate because in some of these applications, they say, oh, our main focus is to support artists, to support the musical field. But I didn't see that reflected in the budget. But in this budget, I did. So the payments to artists, and it was broken down per artist. There was a lot of detail included, and it was almost twice as much allotted as any other line item budget. So I appreciated that they were allocating those funds to support the musicians and the work that they do.
Thank you. If there are no additional comments, we do have 2 minutes left. You may finalize your scores. Just give me a thumbs up or head nod when you're ready. And Natasha and Candace, you're all set? Okay, great. All right, Vibe Entertainment Group is next. Natasha is the primary and Candace is the secondary. Let me set the timer. Timer's all set. So Natasha, whenever you begin speaking, I'll start it.
Okay. So I am the primary reviewer for Vibe Entertainment Group, and this is a project that's focused on a variety of events that highlight underrepresented artists and which aims to foster inclusivity, but also speaks later on in the application about, kind of focusing on trans, BIPOC, burlesque, and other entertainers. One of the statements was that they are dedicated to empower underrepresented artists. Just in terms of like identifying the key constituency, I felt like at the very early stages of it, it could have been a little clear who the key constituencies were. It did talk about diversity, but in a broader sense, like wanting to empower artists as a whole and basically the unique performing arts, but not identifying specifically, whether it was, BIPOC or LGBTQ, but just kind of a general, embracing of like supporting all unique performers. Later on, the application did go into more detail about that. The application talks about, they began performing in 2021, so they have several years under their belt of doing various performances, a lot of holiday performances every year. Since 2001, they've been doing like kind of Christmas events and some other holiday events that focus on these types of performances that are unique to BIPOC and trans and LGBTQ community. Like, as I mentioned before, burlesque was one of them. And let's see, they support the education and professional development of these unique performing artists. I got a sense from the application that their aim is really to help develop and support this kind of under the smaller, world of performing artists, to make sure they have opportunities and to, educate them on like how to better develop themselves professionally and get more and have more opportunities to perform. Let's see what else. As I said, their holiday, they have some events planned for 2024 as well as 2025. There's a lot of TBDs in there, but I'm sure that has to do with, waiting for funding to come through, probably in from different sources. So I would have liked to see a little bit more concrete plan, but it seems like they have a basic outline of what they plan to do. Just probably can't nail down the specifics yet without having funding support. And the only other item I would say, accessibility and language there was some planning there, but I think it left a little to be desired. I'm not sure that they named vendors in both of those areas, but I just wanted to see them flesh those sections out a little bit more. And let's see if I can be specific. So I don't want to, let's see, be too vague on that. So when I look at I got to go back and review it. There's so many, so many thoughts in my mind. So like for accessibility, they do address accessibility, but it really kind of focuses on, meeting those basic requirements. They do mention some other groups that aren't normally addressed, like when we're talking about accommodations, like, ADHD and autism disorders and mental health disorders. So kind of, I think that's a unique group that they're focusing on. I just didn't see a specific vendor named or a specific plan for how to address accommodations for those. And for language, they did speak about ASL and what they would do to accommodate that in terms of like casting. Again, I didn't see a vendor named or specific plan for how to make it accessible to the community, but they did address it, so I scored accordingly. Okay, that's it. I'll hand it over to my secondary.
All right, I really don't have a whole lot more to add. I would say that would have been helpful to have more information if they had expounded on their key constituencies, and provided more detail with their cultural activity.
Thank you, Candace. Thoughts from the rest of the group? Neil?
Yeah, I thought this was well written. In regards to the proposed public activity of the holiday show, I think it's a great idea to try to diversify it by including Hanukkah and Kwanzaa. I know that y'all have a representative who is African American. I don't see if there was a representative who was Jewish, but would love to see more specifics and cultural sensitivity on how those holidays would be celebrated in the programming, because that could very easily fall into cultural appropriation if not done correctly, and have a negative effect on the event. So we'd just love to see what cultural sensitivity is enacted on celebrating those holidays.
That's a good point. I didn't even think about that. That's a good point.
I just wanted, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Bianca.
So I just wanted to say also as a well-written proposal, and overall, I felt that it was more rooted in serving communities that experience other forms of institutional marginalization, and that's where I landed for this application.
Kind of, you know, in my final comments, I put that I would have liked more clarification on key constituents, because I felt like they named a lot of different groups, and it seemed like some of their it's like, because they named so many different groups, it's like they're trying to service everyone. So I think that something might have gotten it would have been a stronger application with more like direct clarification on, you know, the cultural activities that they're planning and how that relates to the key constituents and the audience. I would have liked to see more information specifically about the artists that are performing and demographics, and also audiences and where the performances are held. So like, what communities are they based in?
Any other comments?
I'm not sure who mentioned it earlier about the accessibility section. I thought it was interesting that this application focused on disabilities that span beyond the physical, and they focused on the performers themselves. And I also noted that there is an artistic director listed in the cultural leadership who is actually a special education instructor. That's his day job. So I sort of inferred that a lot of those accommodations would be developed and provided by that artistic director who is trained to do so.
And I'm just going to provide one area of clarification in terms of the program guidelines and the scoring rubric. So the city's interpretation of disability communities is very broad, and it includes both visible and invisible disabilities. And applicants were directed to specifically select one. So we encourage them to name the specific community that they are serving to help them put together a more specific plan of action to implement. And just in general, it is not our expectation that an applicant serve all disability communities, because that would be impossible, because they are so different and they require so many different things. So our expectation is within applications, one is named they have a clear plan of implementation and providing a professional level of service to those communities so that they feel invited and included in that space. So just generally across all applications. That's what we're looking for. We have 3 seconds left. So with that, I'm gonna have you all finalize your scores. And while y'all are working on finalizing your scores, you can work on bringing up 1 ounce opera. That'll be the next application we review. All right, and if everyone's ready to go, we'll go into 1 ounce opera. Meredith is the primary and Natasha is the secondary. I have the timer ready to go. So Meredith, when you begin speaking, I'll start the timer.
Okay, I'm introducing 1 ounce opera. They're requesting funds to present their fresh squeeze ounce of opera in February of 2025. I liked that this applicant provided a lot of information about the history of opera overall, which helped to shape the rest of the proposal. In the history of service, they mention that at their core is the belief that opera is for everyone. And then they go on to talk about their key constituents, which include artists and musicians that have been historically underrepresented in all facets of the operatic genre, people of color, people with disabilities, women. They also went on to mention that opera is historically expensive to pursue and produce. And their goal is really to remove those barriers to entry by offering paid opportunities to those underrepresented artists. Overall, I thought it was a very good and well-written application. A lot of information was presented. I liked that they mentioned their approach to inclusive, low barrier, non-traditional opera, giving that priority to historically underrepresented creators outside of the quote unquote norms of traditional opera, which they outlined for us in History of Service. They also had some evidence that they provided some leadership roles and career development, education, and networking for those diverse local artists over the whole life of the organization. And I'll turn it over to the secondary.
I really enjoyed this application as well. I love the idea of making an art form that's not usually accessible, more accessible to the broader community, and aiming to represent, a more diverse population, women, people of color, LGBTQ, just diversifying overall. And then also I did see like a focus in, representing women as leaders as well, and people of color as leaders in terms of writing operas. I've heard and read about, this issue, and you can visibly see that there hasn't historically been a great representation. And I like the fact that they gave data to support, again, like the historic, situation, and then what they've done as an organization to impact that. That to me is compelling, because if they can show, what are the typical, what typically happens in this art form versus what they're attempting to do with their funding and in their programming. And so things like, it says opera penned by women makes up less than 1% of opera programs nationally, but 60% of theirs include female composers. People of color pen 24% of the ones that they represent, which is 181 times higher than the national average of 1.4%. So that shows an impact there. I did look at some of the clips, and I I didn't see a huge representation of people of color, but again, that's kind of an assumption because I don't know what people's backgrounds are by viewing. But just, I guess I did see women represented. So I just, again, like having a way to measure the participation of those that who you state are your key constituencies and making sure that that's represented in the application, and then in your history of work, or if not in your history of work, have a plan for how to report that in the project that we're funding. But overall, I like the idea. I think it's important. I'll open it up.
Any comments from anyone else?
Candace, I see your mark. I can go. I
Yeah.
saw it. Okay, cool. Yeah, this application did their homework for sure on the history of opera and why it could be expanded. Two things I would have liked to have seen more is a greater breakdown of what people, the breakdown of people of color, because there's assumptions about what people identify as and what their lived experience is, because that does make a really big difference. If I can maybe identify as something, but if my whole experience has been as a straight white male, that is a lot of times how I'm going to be perceived. And then one of the statistics talks about another statistic was used as folks who identify as non-white. Once again, would love to see more specifics on what that looks like, of what non-white, defining what non-white is. So just a greater breakdown of people, of what those demographics look like.
Thank you, Neil. Anyone else? Candace, I didn't know if you want to speak.
So I'll just say quickly that I agree with what's been previously stated. I like the intentionality of this organization and their application and their efforts to include people of color, queer and disabled as an audience member. Pardon me. As an audience member at an opera, I've seen what we, what is standard or typical, and so it's nice to see that they're trying to do something different and be more inclusive.
One other point I wanted to add that I made a note about was just in the budget, that, and this is, I don't think I took any points from it, but it's just something to note. The payments to artists are almost the same as the payments to admin support. Which, I know it's necessary for, but in general, I think payments to artists is important to focus on that. But again, I know every situation is unique in terms of like the amount of support needed and the amount of admin needed. But just in general, I think artists is who we want to pay for if possible.
And I'll just provide a point of clarification in terms of the guidelines and scoring rubric. We do, in the budget section, we do encourage applicants to pay either artists or administrators. So we do encourage payment to people. There isn't necessarily a scoring rubric component over the other.
I do appreciate in the budget about the payments to artists that they did include that they were increasing the salary of the founder and CEO by 8%. So you kind of have like an idea of the adjustment. Considering that inflation has been like 11 or 12%, I feel like this is kind of just keeping up with the cost of living. So I appreciated that they were forthcoming with that information.
Any other comments?
Okay, seeing that there are none and we're right at the 2-minute mark, you can go ahead and finalize your scores. And as you're doing that, I'll let you know we'll be pulling up PocoWorks next. And this will be our last one before we take our first break of the morning. So just give me a nod or a thumbs up when you're ready. Okay, is everyone ready to go? Great. All right. Next up is Polka Works. Neil is the primary, Meredith is the secondary. The timer is all set. So Neil, when you begin speaking, I'll start the timer.
So Polka Works is an inclusive arts organization with an extensive history of producing successful public events. Since 2010, Polka Works' mission has focused on cultural traditions and generational histories through the arts. The proposed project is the screening of Two Worlds, One Path film, which centers around a Holocaust and Vietnamese Catholic who fled similarly horrific circumstances during the fall of Saigon. The film emphasizes individual responsibility to uphold human dignity. It deals specifically with genocide, anti-Semitism, and the personal impact on the two women. I did like that this documentary is centered around underrepresented communities in cinema, Asian Americans, Vietnamese Americans. So I like the fact that they're thoughtful in that, and then also the inclusion of underrepresented groups in music, with the focus being musicians, and including Asian and Jewish musicians in the film. I would like to see more clarity in a specific upliftment of underrepresented communities in Polka Works' mission. And I'm not 100% convinced that the cultural leadership's experience is committed to a lifelong commitment to uplifting communities that are more at risk. I could see some area of improvement for greater inclusion in that space. And would love to see more research on the communities most at risk in the city of Austin specifically, and how Polka Works could better serve them. I think there's a great opportunity to also engage with both Asian American and Jewish students at the University of Texas at Austin specifically to reach new audiences and maximize their contribution. And that is it from my comments. So
I thought there were some really great things about this application as well. There was a lot of information here. I noted that the proposal outlined this really interesting cross-cultural experience and project for 2025. It spelled out commonalities amongst those two distinct communities. And it was clear from the application that they were really evolving to serve new cultural groups in the community. In future applications, I would love to see more evidence of how the content of that specific activity would be developed by and be accountable to the community, both communities. I couldn't see that necessarily in the cultural leadership section. And I think that's it.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
So I would have liked to see more information about the cultural leadership and decision making of this application. I know that they listed a variety of industry professionals that collaborated on the creation of the project, but I would have liked to see more information on the lived experience about the people that collaborated on this project, and also board members and decision makers. Because I was seeing, I felt like that kind of translated into other parts of the application, like with accessibility. You know, it's great that they wanted to include like a ASL translation. However, if half of the documentary is about the Vietnamese community, I think that they should have Vietnamese subtitles that should be provided by a professional. They mentioned, you know, a lot about like peanut allergies and about like they focused a lot about like the food and the reception of the film screening, which I felt was kind of diverging from, you know, the meat of the project. And they were talking about like peanut allergies, but if the other half of the film is about the Jewish community, then the food should represent like, you know, it should be kosher. So any Jewish people that are attending that keep kosher can be able to participate in the culinary experience of the film screening. So I felt like there was, although the project itself took these two communities and found like a pathway to combine them, and I felt like there was a voice from those communities that was missing because I didn't see representation in the actual execution of the program. And to that point, if we're talking about kind of, you know, the Holocaust, genocide, fleeing Vietnam, forced immigration, I thought that it was, as somebody that did a lot of programming, like programming and events and museums, I thought that that was a little odd that they include a kids corner, because if the content of this film is of a very serious nature, I don't think that like there's places for children. I have children, welcome them into that space, but for a film screening that is of this content, I don't know if that was appropriate. And I thought that there's like a few like disconnects in the actual execution of what they wanted to produce for the film screening.
Yeah, I agree with that. The key constituencies were named as people interested in learning in depth about our community's rich cultures, traditions, and history, which is a broad you know, target. And so I think that's a little confusing. It seems like a very personal project based on the description of like the specific instance and like wanting to depict and educate about this specific instance, and then also them wanting to engage. The engagement was with visual artists, ranching families, musicians, other creatives, middle school teachers, and so like it was kind of unclear like who are they trying to reach specifically, and then how to connect that to their key constituency as they defined it, or the key constituency that the city of Austin, you know, holds out as like being, you know, the ones that are affected or at risk of, you know, cultural erasure, which I think there's a space for that. I mean, you know, we're talking about, you know, Pacific Islander and Asian communities, then that should have been highlighted as like an important, you know, community to educate the broader community about. And so I just think the information should have been organized a little bit better and more focused, and just keyed in on like the specifics of who they're trying to reach, what they're trying to communicate, and then, you know, yeah, that's my feedback.
To add a little minor detail that I would have liked to seen for the marketing portion. When it came to social media, there was no platforms that were listed, and I think that could have helped their proposal. It just says social media monthly posts have already been sent for 18 months regarding film. Paid advertising on these platforms will begin January 25th, but it doesn't name specific platforms.
Any other comments? I would just like to say, thinking about funding in general, just kind of the complexity that happens as this is focusing people who face oppression, marginalization, and cultural erasure. There are two kind of groups, people, again, who have been doing this every day. That's been their mission forever. They're doing this work, they want this money, and the other groups that maybe haven't been doing this but are shifting their mindset, trying to learn, trying to evolve their community. So I just say that out loud, that with clarity and depth and maybe lack of information, just thinking about where are these communities coming from. Are they trying to enhance their programming from a place where they are not knowledgeable, or again, is this something that they've done forever? And just having grace in terms of the learning and growth mindset there.
I agree with that. I mean, in looking at this application, I do see where they're historically they do a lot of ranching type events where they did things around like the ranching community. But I just think connecting those communities or showing like the transition from this to that, some way bridging it, because it kind of doesn't connect in terms of like who they're reaching and their objective. I mean, jumping, just some kind of connection or explanation that helps us understand.
And with that, please finalize your scores. And while you're finalizing your scores, we're going to transition into our first 15-minute break of the morning. So that will put us at 11:22. So if you'll be back by 11:22, go stretch, get some more coffee, some tea, some water, and we'll be back here in 15 minutes. As soon as we get welcome back, everyone. We'll get started here in just a moment with Songrise Arts. As soon as we have Neil and Candace back on the dais. Great, thanks, Neil. Welcome, welcome. Okay. Songrise Arts. Stephanie is the primary and Neil is the secondary. I have the timer ready to go. So whenever you can begin speaking, I'll start the timer.
Okay, so Songrise Arts works with youth age 14 to 26. Their mission is to provide trauma-informed spaces for youth from underserved communities to find healing, empowerment, and opportunity and community through songwriting and performance. Some of our students have a lived experience with foster care, homelessness, and the intersections of various systematic vulnerabilities. I appreciated that in the key constituents, they identified like very specifically details and demographics of who they're servicing. And overall, I thought it was a strong application for a case for support for at-risk youth and musician support. And one of the things that I felt was unique to this program that I appreciated was that the students that are participating in these activities receive a stipend, a monetary stipend, which I thought was great because this empowers students to feel like their talents and their time that they're spending in this program are valuable. So that's something that I thought was unique to this. So I'll turn it over to Neil.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yes, very well written. Great initiative. I would like to see a greater breakdown of the lived experiences of the board, of the leadership board. And I noticed that a lot of the mentors there's a cycle of getting former students to become leaders. So I would like to see a greater breakdown of the demographics of that, because that's going to impact who is being brought in to the organization. If you're getting students from one demographic or one part of the city, et cetera, and you're recycling that, it's not going to necessarily represent the whole, or it's not going to provide diverse perspective. So I would just like to see a greater breakdown of that. And yeah, that's it for me.
Any other comments from the group? Okay, Anne Marie, I'll turn it to you then.
All right, if there are no additional comments, you may finalize your scores.
Oh, just checking, Meredith, you didn't raise your hand, right? Okay, I thought I saw a move. Okay, thank you.
All right, if everyone's ready, we'll be moving on to exploded drawing. Give everyone just a moment to be set. Okay, Bianca will be the primary and Stephanie is the secondary. The timer is ready to go. So Bianca, when you begin speaking, I'll start the timer.
Okay, so I'm discussing exploded drawing, whose mission is to elevate the electronic music community in Texas by encouraging creativity and stimulating conversation among electronic artists and listeners. At each exploded drawing session, 6 new beat makers, sound collectors, and electronic composers are given a platform to perform their original work for an open-minded audience. They've grown significantly since their inception. They have been rooted in highlighting BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ artists. 80% of their representation is of people of color. They book artists of color as a priority, gay and trans artists as a priority as well. It seems like they do really well with keeping open lines of communication within the community, which I thought was excellent. And I would have liked more clarity on their board diversity. The makeup of the board was very unclear. And I'll turn it over to secondary.
Okay, I thought this was a strong application. It was well organized. It was easy to read, which made going through it, a lot easier. I felt like what their goals for the musical events was intentionally planned, and that they already have dates and everything set, so they know the goals of what they want to accomplish, who they're going to hire, which I thought was great. And one thing that I enjoyed about this application under accessibility was the assisted listening devices. That they are going to, that they've been working with or getting information from ArtSpark Texas about getting the assisted listening devices and the headsets for those participants in the audience that would like to utilize those.
Awesome.
So,
Any comments from everyone else?
I have a comment. I really like this application. I feel like this is like a model application almost. Right out of the gate, they let you know who their focus is, who their key constituency is. They don't really, they don't leave you questioning, like, who are they serving? I would love to know what exploded drawing means, because it's a fascinating type name. Like, that has nothing to do with the application, but I just thought it was an interesting name. But yeah, I think they just did a great job of talking about who they're serving, and kind of talking about what they've already done. And what was the other part of it? Yeah, they have things planned out. I just thought it was a great application. I didn't have a lot of questions as I was going through it. I felt like a lot of what we are looking for was answered. Like in the leadership part, I mean, they didn't beat us over the head with the BIPOC, and LGBTQ thing. They set it up front, and then it was consistent throughout the application. It wasn't like it didn't feel like it was like they were doing it for the purposes of the application. It seemed like this is really who they are and who they serve and who's involved. So anyway, I like the way it was written.
Any other comments?
I think this was a very strong application. Would just love to see a greater breakdown of what people of color, BIPOC looks like. Going through the artist book, it does look like they value diversity, but once again, would just like to see a greater breakdown of what people of color looks like. And tying that into, because it kind of makes sense, electronic music naturally serves a lot of LGBTQ and diverse groups. So just would like to see a greater connection on why that is possibly being endangered in the city of Austin. Because as an Austin native, electronic music is abundant, but just I feel like you could further distinguish themselves on these are some of the challenges we face in the electronic music scene. So yeah.
Other thoughts? I would just like to say quickly, and a little bit of connection to what Neil had said, and this is kind of what I felt overall. So people who are listening, future grant winners, just the whole sense of intersectionality. I think we do live in a homogeneous cultures. And so just thinking about the in-depth that you can do in terms of intersectionality in this grant in particular, again, I also agree it's a very strong grant, but it kind of just lists instead of talking about what are the dynamics between being a BIPOC individual and LGBTQ plus QIA plus, or being BIPOC and also from a low income background. I think it's tough for people. I'm biracial, so maybe that's the advantage I have in looking deeper in my own identity. But just thinking about intersectionality is deep, and how does that affect the people that you're working with? Again, not critiquing the specific application greatly, but just putting that out there in general about intersectionality.
I also wanted to mention, I also always have that question about BIPOC, the term, because it is it does include so many populations, and you do feel like sometimes it can be just a blanket, label. I did look at, and I remember going through this application, looking at like their activities, their cultural activities, and when they list out who's performing, they do state like Leilani is an Asian American female producer. In March, they have Stro Elliott, that's a Black beat maker. 5:30 in May, Dallas beat maker, a Black Dallas beat maker. So they talk about who they're hiring. That helped me, informed my lens in terms of like who they were talking about in BIPOC. So that helped me understand it. But you're right, it doesn't always list it out. When they say BIPOC, it's just kind of like throwing a blanket, and you don't really know who they're talking about.
Any other comments? All right, Anne-Marie.
Okay, go ahead and finalize your scores. And while you're finalizing those scores, you can go ahead and pull up PeerBah. That'll be next. All right, if everyone's ready, we'll go into PeerBah. Candace is the primary and Bianca is the secondary. Make sure the timer's set up correctly. All right, we've got 10 minutes. Candace, whenever you begin speaking, I will start the timer. Candace, you're muted.
Sorry about that. So PeerBah mentions they aim to reach South Asian families. Austin locals are travelers, book and literacy enthusiasts, and those who enjoy cultural experiences, storytelling, and folk. And through 2023-24, they have worked consistently with 400 families in Austin and thousands across the globe through various in-person and online events. They began as a volunteer-led organization, incorporated as a nonprofit in 2023. Their mission is to diversify bookshelves and build storytellers, which I thought was great. They talk a little bit about statistics in terms of children books, where 70% have lead characters that are either animals or white. Only about 5% of books for K through 12 are published by authors of color. And so they mention that they have worked with spotlighted 200 plus artists, creatives of South Asian descent. 100 plus BIPOC children have received opportunities to showcase their art. One of the things that I noted is I would like more detail in these numbers with BIPOC children in terms of who they've worked with and some of the impact that has occurred. They also talk about working with BIPOC writers and illustrators, and the same thing. What I would have liked to see is more information about that breakdown and that impact there. Regarding cultural leadership, I would have liked to have seen more detail there, as well as who's leading and that who has input and more in the decision making. The cultural activity, I thought they laid out and gave us an idea of what that will look like during AAPI Heritage Month in May. In terms of, let me just take a moment. That they had a good plan for their marketing, and would have liked to seen a few more details on the budget. Turn it over to the secondary.
All right, so I'll go ahead and take over secondary. Well-written proposal. Ms. Candace reached a lot of the points that I was going to mention as well. Regarding their board, it seems very strong with academia and leadership. However, the applicant does not provide a clear description of leadership roles or the relationships to their key constituencies. So more breakdown of that would have been helpful. Within the language section, there was no mention of trained professionals. Within the proposal, they didn't mention efforts to reach audience members with disabilities and or audience members whose primary language is not English. It could have helped their proposal had they attributed something to that area. Overall, I was appreciative of the activities in the organization lineup. It seemed like it was very well thought out. We can open it up for discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, Bianca. Yeah, anyone else have any thoughts?
So about the cultural leadership, I would have liked to see more detailed information. I think Candace touched upon this. However, I was able to find the bios of the people on their website, but you had to like dig for it. And you saw that there was a nice bios that gave some information about people's backgrounds and all that, which I appreciated, but I had to go looking for it. So including that would have been helpful in navigating the application. And I liked this application because it gives opportunity for events for that intergenerational experience that adults, elderly, children can go and enjoy together. So this is like an appropriate program that all different ages can experience together, which I think in the applications that we've been reviewing, this was one of the few where I saw that you know, you can take everybody in your home to go enjoy. So I enjoyed that about the application.
I saw Natasha and then Neil.
The only area I was going to speak on is intersectionality. I do see this project is focused mainly on South Asian, you know, art and writing, storytelling. And it mentions other groups like immigrants and folk artists, creatives of color, but I just think it was a little general. So I would have liked to see more intentional and specific, you know, description of like what groups they intersect with in terms of their targets and participation. That mentions lower income families, which I think is important. So it's mentioned, but I just would have liked to see it better developed.
And yeah, I feel like there was a lot of clarity in the mission and how this serves underrepresented communities. Had to do a little digging, like Stephanie said, but I also would think it'd be a great idea to explore, because I know this is intergenerational, and trying to gain as many diverse perspectives within the South Asian community. Would love to see engagement with the many South Asian organizations and students at the University of Texas at Austin. Feel like that's just that and other colleges in Austin. I feel like there's so much room for potential for growth and reaching new audiences. So just my little added tidbit.
Any other thoughts?
I would add too with this application, something I liked while they have worked with families in Austin, and it's clear what their mission is and that they're serving this community. I love their reach in terms of online programming so that you're going to bring more experiences into what they're actually doing in this community.
Okay, if there are no additional comments, you may finalize your scores. And we'll be reviewing Austin Crown Theater next. And just give me a little nod, wave, or thumbs up when you're ready. And Candace, are you ready to? Are you still finalizing scores?
Oh, I'm sorry. I am ready.
Okay, great. Austin Crown Theater. The primary will be Natasha and Candace is the secondary. The timer is all set. So Natasha, whenever you begin speaking, I'll start the timer.
Okay, Austin Crown Theater is an organization with a mission to develop original productions that reflect the vibrant and diverse cultural fabric of Austin. In that description of the key constituency, it doesn't pin down like who those are in the community. They do list an artistic vision and mission, which was helpful, and it just goes into what their mission, their goal, their aim is, and how they serve the community. But I didn't see a clear definition of who the key constituency was. And let's see my notes. The history talks about their start being in 2020, again with the goal of making theater accessible to all. It doesn't address a target audience, but just broadly making theater available to diverse communities and, you know, related to affordability, you're making sure theater's affordable for all, employing diverse groups, or just, you know, making sure everyone had access to employment in theater, providing community networking and partnership opportunities, and then leadership and development opportunities, which I think are all important. So they described in their history what their aim has been historically, but again, it doesn't link back to who that community is specifically, other than just diverse groups that may not be represented currently, but I just don't know who that is. And then the cultural leadership kind of follows that same thread of not nailing down which community should be represented in that leadership. It does give, you know, a list of very qualified, it seems, you know, people involved in the leadership with experience in this area. They do give, you know, some reference to being part of LGBTQ community, but I don't see anything about any other marginalized communities. I mean, there's description about like where people originate from, but again, it's not clear. The cultural activities part, on a better note, is very clear. I really like the way that they described what they plan to do and then what their goals are. I like the idea of linking a description of what they're doing and then what they aim to accomplish, which is cultural enrichment, education, economic impact, community building. So that's consistent with their mission. So I thought that was great. And intersectionality was addressed, but again, it wasn't specific. There was one line in it that said they strive for inclusivity in their casting and hiring. And while striving is a good thing, I would have liked to see like a commitment and a plan for how to do that. They do speak about hiring disabled participants and support. I mean, hiring, you know, diverse communities and supporting disabled participants. So that's good. But again, just a commitment and a plan for that. And that's all I have.
So I would concur with what Natasha stated. What would have been helpful in reviewing this application is more clarity and detail on their key constituencies, more detail in terms of their history of service, the proposed public activity. While they provided some details, I also would have liked more information about that as well. So just overall, in reviewing this application, I needed more information.
All right. Any other thoughts from the group?
Yeah, I agree with Candace and Natasha about wanting more detail and more specific detail. Like for example, in the budget, they mention several times about the summer camp, that program that they're wanting to produce. But they were it just said, you know, summer camp, but you know, what's the content? What are the ages? When, like, what's the length of the summer camp? Is it only for, you know, an hour a day? You know, that would have given a better idea about the impact of the summer camp, because everybody knows like people are looking for, you know, childcare opportunities that are affordable in their city, which is not accessible to everyone because camps are very expensive. So, you know, knowing the cost of the summer camp and the length would have given me a better idea about the impact of this component of the service that they're wanting to present. So.
So I just wanted to mention really quickly on the cultural activities. There was a section in there that gave me some pause. And it was when they mentioned that next year's show, we hope, will be about the differences in Hispanic and white culture in a fun and delightful way. And I think maybe that sentence could have been broken down differently and maybe said, you know, which holiday versus which holiday instead of separating out the two. I think there's a little bit of my lived experience is, you know, when I fill out forms, I'm asked, what is your ethnicity? Hispanic. And then I get to the race part and it says, what is your ethnicity? And I don't think I'm white, but that's really the only option that I can mark. So I just say that I'm not going to answer. But I feel like it gave me some pause.
I stopped at that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut off. Sorry. Go ahead, Neil, or whoever who was speaking. Oh, I thought someone was speaking. I that caught my attention too. I didn't know whether that was brave or I wasn't sure how to take that. Like, okay, that's interesting that someone's willing to point that out. But yeah, it did kind of catch me off guard too. Because there are differences, but I'm like, why? And what's the goal here? And I don't know. I didn't dive too deeply into it, but it did catch me off guard a little.
I appreciate all the comments being made. I'll just put into the chat or the conversation as well for any future applicants, just the idea versus intentionality and performativeness. I think throughout this application, there's a lot of at risk of cultural erasure, marginalized community compared to some other ones, kind of, you know, talking about it and then going into the meat of what they're doing. And so just reminding organizations who are applying, yes, there's money on the table, and yes, this is for groups that do face cultural erasure, marginalized groups, but just being mindful of the intentionality of who you're talking about and what's going on, because I think sometimes people get a little skewed when money's there and trying to get funds compared to actually doing the real work.
Hello. Yeah, I was gonna say that I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep butting in, but because as I think through it, like I said, it could be two different things. It could be this is really brave and this is a conversation we need to have, but it depends on who's leading the conversation and the intention behind it, right? Because you know, it could be a good conversation. You know, this could be educating people, but if it's said and if it's approached and there's if it's led by misinformed or, you know, people who aren't included in that community, it could go really wrong. So.
I know we have like a small amount of time, but any other thoughts before passing it to Anne-Marie?
Okay, seeing that there are none, you may go ahead and finalize your scores. And while you're finalizing those scores, if you'd like to go ahead and pull up the No Idea Festival, that's what we will be reviewing next. And just give me a thumbs up or a nod when you're ready to roll. Right. Thank you. Okay. Meredith, you are the primary. Natasha, you are the secondary. I have the timer ready to go. So Meredith, whenever you begin speaking, I'll start the timer.
Okay, I am introducing the No Idea Festival. In their proposal, their application, they'll be presenting the 19th edition of an improvised music festival in September of 2025. They define their key constituencies as marginalized artists working within the non-commercial art form of improvised music. Their mission is to establish Austin as a creative center for contemporary improvised music nationally and internationally, and to connect creative musicians from Texas and the world, providing space and time where the artistic process can flourish. What I liked about this application was across the whole application, showed a lot of collaboration and intersectionality across all areas of those activities that they proposed. They described that festival, it's a 3-day festival. Look at my notes again. Very, very well. They broke it down into morning and afternoons and evenings. And the festival is meant to allow artists to articulate a variety of working methods and then collaborate with other artists who they've never collaborated with before. I thought another thing that stood out to me was the focus on BIPOC, LGBTQ plus female musicians, and then recent immigrant artists as well. I was appreciative that the language accessibility section specifically focused and logically focused on the large Spanish-speaking audience that they noted that they would draw and have drawn. Things I would have liked to see more information about. They mentioned an artist advisory panel noted within that cultural leadership section, and didn't specifically go into great detail about who makes up that particular leadership group. And then there are commissioned parts of the project that feature Black, trans, Latinx artists, but a lot of those commissioned artists aren't local to the Austin area, which I understand is part of their project. But they didn't specifically go into great detail about the local artists that would be affected. So I'll turn it over to my secondary.
Okay, yeah, I did think there was a lack of clarity in the key constituency representation and leadership. And I mean, this application seems to describe a group and a project that's truly like a fringe group of artists. You know, the way they talk about nonconformity, innovation, kind of just experimental, not only like collaboration with other artists, but just they're truly like in their artistic element. And then also thought it was interesting the projects about these pods that they build. So the organization and the projects that they are doing seem to be marginalized in the fact that they're not probably the types of events that corporations are going to hire. You know what I mean? So I appreciated that part of it, that they're focusing on like non-commercial, marginalized artistic groups. That's all I had.
Neil, I saw you on mute. Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. Yeah, I think this is a great program, put a lot of detail into it. Would just challenge you to, I guess, illustrate, add more clarity behind the research in cultural intersectionality within the LGBTQ plus community, because a lot of times that can serve kind of a majority group. So we'd just like to see intentionality in understanding the dynamics within and the diversity within the LGBTQ plus community, and how you can serve those underrepresented communities or underserved communities within the LGBTQ community.
I felt a lack of Austinite representation in this application. I think it's great that they are inviting artists from around the world. However, I felt that local Austin musicians that live, 365 days in Austin, that are doing the work in Austin year round, that they were kind of treated as an afterthought, that all of these other artists that are international are the curators of the festival. And then it's like, oh, well, we're going to also bring on Austin musicians, Austin representation. So I felt kind of a disconnect from the community in that way. And also I felt that there was a disconnect of representation of Austin as a whole within their board, because I'm not in, research on website and all this, like I was seeing a lack of any of the board members actually being based in Austin. So I take issue with that how are you, going to say that you're servicing this community, you're getting artists. It felt like that they're kind of like dropping into Austin and doing this festival and then leaving. So there was a disconnect for me.
Other thoughts from the panelists?
Just quickly, I thought it was a strong, well-written application, and I felt reading through it, I got a true sense of who they are and what they do, what their work is. I thought they had a strong marketing plan as well. I just overall thought it was a well-written application.
Other thoughts?
Just to bring in a point of clarity for the applicant and for panelists, the cultural funding programs do allow for funds to be used to bring in international artists, and funds can be used to provide travel expenses and payment to those artists. So there's no prohibition against that. And isn't necessarily a scoring criteria based on bringing in artists from out of town, either pro or con. Are there any additional comments before we move
If I
on?
may, if I may,
Go ahead.
just really quickly, I think hear loud and clear from everyone and what Anne-Marie said, just thinking the idea of education and how that we only know what we know. And so sometimes these opportunities do allow us to grow and learn and expand our horizons. And what everyone has said here, making sure that it is place-based. And then another thought that comes to my mind too, Stephanie, you really brought it up, just this idea of continuity. One thing that I would say with any kind of grant is money is going to come, but money is going to end. And when that money ends, what does the continuity look like for your programming, your constituents, leadership, and everything? One-off programs are very common. And so what does it look like for an organization to continuously work on the commitments that they've set in a grant?
Thank you, Andre. Good guidance there. If there are no additional, oh, Natasha, you have some more? 1 minute.
Okay, just real quick. Is there a limit to how much funding they can get from Elevate? Like, how many times can they be funded by Elevate? Just, is this like seed money or just curious?
No, there's no limit on the number of times an organization can receive funds from the Elevate program. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so my final notes were that even with the amount of traveling by marginalized artists, I still feel that this nonprofit will be great for BIPOC and LGBTQ, IA plus and Spanish speaking and disabled communities. That's all.
Okay. With that, let's finalize our scores. While y'all are finalizing your scores, the next application we will be reviewing is River City Pops, if you want to pull that one up. And if we're all ready to go, the primary for this one is Neil. The secondary is Meredith. The timer is all set. So Neil, when you begin speaking, I'll start the timer.
River City Pop's mission is to provide affordable arts, entertainment, and foster partnerships with Austin schools, businesses, and other art organizations. Their key constituents are individuals and families seeking art access, as well as artists and art professionals seeking employment. And their primary activity is the production of a main stage show each season. I believe that this application, the material provided, the website gives a very clear idea of who they are, who they serve. I love that they made it very apparent that the majority of the membership and audiences is LGBTQ plus. And they also made it very clear that they wish to expand their audience base and make performance arts more accessible. I would love to see more information on how River City Pops is seeking to expand their audience base and serve those communities, and serve communities with low socioeconomic status and underrepresented communities in the performance art space. Would love to see a greater breakdown of the self-identified BIPOC leadership board. Would love to see more details on the intersectionality of LGBTQ plus community, of the LGBTQ community in Austin. As mentioned earlier, you know, that can in Austin be very, could very much serve one demographic who identifies as LGBTQ. So would love to see the research on what that community looks like in Austin, in areas that could be better represented, and then from there, better serviced. And so, yeah, that is it for me. I'll pass it on to my secondary.
Thanks, Neil. In the hopes to not echo everything you just said, you covered a lot of things that were on my notes. I liked in this application that they really did spell out employment opportunities that they've created for Austin area artists, contract work for choreographers and photographers and videographers and technicians and designers. They did state that they had just recently ratified a DEI and membership chair on the board to lead equity audits of hiring, amongst other artistic decisions. And I appreciated that. They also said that was performative. They were saying that these things are performative without action, and so they took action. I also noted that they mentioned that in their cultural leadership section, they mentioned that they give audiences power by centering their feedback. And I would like to know more about how they use that data to adjust their future shows in their programming, especially with their partnerships with Voight Elementary, which is in Round Rock. And according to the Voight Elementary website, their student demographics are 73.1 Hispanic. I thought that was, I wanted to know how the elementary school students' feedback factored into their programming. That's it for me.
Other comments from the group? Awesome. Just primary and secondary, any other comments from you all?
Just echoing again the BIPOC breakdown theme that's been going for most of the morning. They did mention that their membership is 40% BIPOC, but again, we don't know what that means. So I don't know how important it is, but I think it's just good information to have, because just for our knowledge.
Other thoughts?
For the language accessibility, I think they could have been more thorough in what they listed. I had to pull from a different section to see that they were going to provide marketing materials in Spanish and distribute them in primarily Spanish-speaking communities. Other than that, they only listed ASL, which I don't feel is a second language. It's English.
I'll provide a little bit of clarity there in terms of scoring rubric guidance. So the city does consider ASL, American Sign Language, as a non-English language. It has a different structure and isn't considered by the city as a non-English, is considered a non-English language.
The other thing is that if they would have been more clear on if these were provided by professional, trained professionals.
Thanks for all the words, Anne-Marie.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of our morning session. If you'll go ahead and finalize your scores. We'll be moving into our lunch break. We're a few minutes into noon, so running just a few minutes behind, and that's totally okay. I think what we'll do is we'll come back, so not to get us too started too late in the afternoon, and to also make sure that we have a pretty nice break for lunch, or our snack break if this isn't your lunchtime. We'll start back up at 1:05. So, a 52-minute break. And yeah, so feel free to finalize those scores. And when we come back, we'll start with Opera East as our starting application. So you can go ahead and make sure your mics are muted and that your video is off, but go ahead and stay logged in for this break. And we'll see you back here at 1:05.